Hi, I'm Ed, and welcome to Minisodes. A couple of years ago, I made this diorama, based on the box art of Epic Space Marine, the second edition of Games Workshop's 6mm scale tabletop miniatures game. Epic enabled players to play large-scale, strategic battles in the war-torn, but surprisingly verdant 41st millennium. Now, whilst I have no plans to play Epic, not yet anyway, I do have a project in mind for this box of 6mm Space Marines. I'm currently playing a series of narrative games of 40k, focusing on Captain Tycho's campaign against the Orcs. Captain Tycho took command of the Third Company when the previous captain was killed shortly after arriving on Armageddon. Now, in reality, I only have about 1,500 points of Blood Angels, a handful of squads, and the odd vehicle. A respectable force for 2nd edition 40k. But wouldn't it be cool to have a whole Third Company, 100 Marines and all their hardware, not necessarily to play with, but to further immerse me into the narrative? The fiction and cinema of the mind can only get you so far, but nothing compares to actually having your commander's full force disposition on the shelf. I began with a bit of research, digging out the Angels of Death Codex, which details out the forces of each company. So essentially the Third Company is a battle company, containing 6 tactical squads, 2 Devastator squads, 2 assault squads, and all their assorted transports and support units. 100 Marines plus extras. This box of Space Marines contains about 3 companies worth, including heaps of captains, sergeants, heavy weapon Marines, land speeders, and, robots? I even had quite a few of these still attached to their sprues. The box also contains a lot of square bases, for 5 of these delightful 6mm Marines to slot into. I actually think they look a lot better than the strips used in the later Epic 40k, but it does make them a bit of a faff to paint. Let's take a look, shall we? The mainstay of the force would be the plentiful Space Marine sculpt for the tactical squads, but I'd also need a fair few of these for the Devastator squads. Yep, definitely 6mm from the top of their Mark 7 heads, down to the soles of their teeny tiny power-armoured feet. The heavy weapon Marines are my favourites, and come with the Corvus Mark 6 helms. They really remind me of the art on the cover of War Gear. The Blood Angels are renowned for their speed, so it made sense to include a couple of land speeders. And also this amazing relic, a Thunderhawk gunship, which will be acting as the transport for the 2 assault squads. The box contained 20 of these commander units, which is about 19 more than necessary, but I do have a plan for their back banners. Stand by for fiddliness. I came across this dreadnought too, so I thought I would include Furiosa. Quite cool to see a Contemptor pattern from this era in this scale. I also have 5 Terminators in my 2nd edition force, so I want to represent them here too, presumably seconded to the Third Company for the most dangerous missions on the campaign. Not contained in the box were Tycho's Rhinos and land speeders. Unfortunately, I had a few of these knocking around. I found this Whirlwind, so I guess Tycho will be receiving some long-range multi-launcher missile support too, which got me thinking I could actually represent this in some off-board artillery in a future mission. After I'd sorted through all of those units, I began putting them into their detachments, starting with the 6 tactical squads. Here are all of the tactical Marines, plus their Rhinos. And now for the 2 Devastator squads. To be honest, I didn't want to be painting Rhinos all week, so I thought it would be very on brand for the Devastators to have a Land Raider each for their transport. Next up were the Assault Marines, and their dropship, the Thunderhawk. Now the 5 Terminators, and their Land Raider. And the Command Squad, led by a tiny Erasmus Tycho, the Golden Boy. I then went through the Tactical and Devastator squads, sprinkling in the Sergeants and Heavy Weapon Marines. After adding the Land Speeders, Dreadnought and Whirlwind Missile Battery, Tycho's 3rd was all present and accounted for, ready for the next phase. Dunking most of Tycho's motor pool in Biostrip. And while that worked its magic, I commenced trimming all of the mould lines off over 100 Marines. This is going to take some time, so whilst I do that, let me give a shout out to my patrons. I promised myself last year that I'd start a Patreon if I got over 10,000 subscribers, and here we are. So, for the cost of a White Dwarf circa 1997, not adjusted for inflation, you'll receive a monthly Patreon exclusive podcast, behind the scenes footage, photos and updates, your name in the thank you credits of every video, and a shout out in the video when you join up. So without further ado, a huge thank you and welcome to Anthony, Bob, Daniel, Adrian B, John, Christopher, Jason, Eri, Thomas, Rob, King of Reposts, Obi, The Hosts, Fraser S, Fraser M, Groznik, Robert, Evie Nids, and Corner Wizard. You're all amazing, and thank you so much for your support, as well as the awesome listener mail for the podcast. Right, it looks like the mould lines are finally finished. I then started gluing the Marines onto their square bases. I also undertook this rather fiddly conversion, but actually, with a fresh scalpel blade, this wasn't too difficult. Time for mass production. After a play with Buffy and a coffee, I was ready to start on the Assault Marines. Then the Terminators. My Dremel came in quite handy to push the Marines flush into their little round holes. Like the banners, I think little details are important on a force like this, so I messed about with one of the land speeders to make it look like it was banking hard at a very low altitude. And with that, the muster was complete. I returned to the pot of Biostrip and, standing over the sink with a toothbrush, started to scrub off all the old paint. This was a bit arduous, so I switched to my electric toothbrush with an old head obviously, and made pretty short work of all the tanks. After some drying time, the vehicles were ready to be assigned to their units. Before priming could begin, I built up the bases on the Contemptor and land speeders with some green stuff. Then stuck all the models onto a bit of cardboard with blue tack. I went outside and sprayed the whole company with Wraithbone spray. I settled on Baal Red, which is a much brighter, richer, more pleasing red than Blood Angels Red. With models of this scale, I think it's really important to ramp up the contrast for a bit of visual punch. I started with the tactical squads, giving each of the models a good even coat, along with their Rhino APC transports. Any details I could revisit later. I took a bit more care with the Land Raiders, as there were larger details to consider, like the tracks and sponson las cannons. I also left out the heavy weapons on the Devastator squads, but there was no need to be too precise at this stage. For the Whirlwind, I took a look at the heavy metal example in Codex Angels of Death, so left the side hatches bare. With quite a bit of red paint laid down, I was ready to switch things up a bit. There's a lot of vibrant yellow knocking around Tycho's Marines, so I chose Imperial Fist, another amazing contrast paint to block in those details. Details like the Terminator's power fists, and of course the Assault Marines' Corvus helms. I decided that the Landspeeder crew would be Assault Marines too. With the vibrant yellow blocked in and dry, I painted the rest of the red on the 2 squads of Assault Marines. And finally, as a bit of a reward to myself, I blocked in all the Baal red on the mighty Thunderhawk. Red complete. Time to block in the Black Legion. I thought I'd leave the fiddly stuff until later, and busied myself blocking in the tracks and las cannons on the Land Raiders. I then went back to my Codex Angels of Death and identified the location of the black on the armour of the Tactical Marines, including the squad leaders and sergeants. So for the sergeants, I blocked in the whole of their pauldrons and then carefully did the trim on the regular Marines, along with their weapons. I painted the Assault Marines' chainswords and bolt pistols too, and as they were in Mark 6 armour, I left their pauldrons red, except for their sergeants. With all that done, I rewarded myself once again with the Thunderhawk. For the metallics, I used Code d'Arms gun metal. When it came to painting over the tracks of the Land Raiders, I did it in such a way as to leave plenty of black showing, doing the same for all the Rhino bolters and exhausts. When that was all dry, I washed all the gunmetal areas with Agrax Earthshade. At this point, I noticed that the Baal red was looking a little flat, so carefully applied a pin wash to the hatches, seals, and armour joints of all the vehicles. I did the same for the torsos of all the infantry too, just to make those details stand out a little more. I think this worked particularly well on the Thunderhawk, especially with the amount of armour plates and extra details this model has. It really helps to sell me on the scale of the aircraft. I was making good progress at this point, and I felt it was time to add a few highlights before I moved on to the finishing touches. I chose Wild Rider Red and used it to pick out those raised details on all the vehicles, along with the chonky details on the Terminators, the jump packs on the Assault Marines, and pauldrons of the Tactical Marines. With that done, I finished the remaining details, including painting the legend himself, Erasmus Tycho, along with his retinue of company officers and specialists. I also painted the Devastator helms blue and added little white blood drops on all the Tactical Squad Rhinos. With pretty much all the painting done, it was time for basing. Now, initially I was planning on using Armageddon Dunes, but the thing is it dries a fair bit darker than it is in the pot, which is a shame, because it does the red of the Marines no favours. I want a real contrast with the red, and something light enough to suggest the glare of the Armageddon sun. AK Interactive's Sandy Desert cures the same colour as it is in the pot, and delivers a much lighter, sandier finish, perfect for the deserts of Armageddon Secundus. I applied this with an old brush to all the bases. It was pretty fiddly on all those infantry stands, but I got there in the end. The next day, with the bases dry, I mixed up a thin wash of Seraphim Sepia and gave all the stands a quick wash to imply shadows and just give a bit more depth and detail to the miniatures. And with that, the third company stood ready. I still have quite a few Marines left. Are there any legendary 40k armies that you would like to see in 6mm? The Ultramarines 3rd Company on Macragge, for example? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss my next video, in which the Armageddon narrative campaign continues with the Dark Fortress. Thanks so much for watching, and wherever you are, happy hobbying.